Every one of these children was born here in Northern Ireland after Good Friday 1998. They're a really lucky generation because they were born into peace. And that's a peace that affects every single one of us and resonates the length and breadth of this island. After literally hundreds of years of violence and bloodshed, this beautiful country of ours is finally at peace. And that's a peace I believe could not have been achieved without the lifelong work of one man, and that man is John Hume. We all owe him an enormous debt because of his extraordinary vision and courage. He achieved what virtually everybody had said was simply impossible and changed not just the course of Irish history, but all of our lives forever. That's why, for me, John Hume is Ireland's greatest. I'm lucky enough to know John Hume just a little. I had the privilege of interviewing him and many others involved in the peace process, but he always stood out from the crowd. Like his own hero, Martin Luther King, he has been a lifelong champion of civil rights and an equal champion of non-violence. He always believed that the root of Ireland's problem wasn't a divided country, but a divided people. And he set out on his lifelong mission to heal that division through dialogue and agreement. But it's been a very long, lonely, and difficult journey. You may be too young to remember or simply eager to forget just how bad the Troubles were. 3,500 people died. I think a lot of us simply switched off and turned our back on Northern Ireland for decades, as if their problems weren't our problems. But even in the darkest days, John Hume did not turn his back. Like all great peacemakers, he had a vision. And alongside David Trimble, he would find a way out of the darkness. John Hume sacrificed virtually everything to pursue his vision for Ireland. And in the end, his achievement was acknowledged with the Nobel Peace Prize. And so he secured his place forever here in the Peace Museum in Oslo, alongside heroes like Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King. But for Hume, genuinely, it was never about awards, in the same way as he felt the Irish question was never about land and borders. For John, it was always about people, about equality, and about respect. It's here in the Glen that John Hume grew up. Ironically, for a man who'd go on to become one of the world's greatest politicians, he came from an utterly non-political family. His father once famously said to him as a little boy, "Son, you can't eat a flag." His family were poor, and just putting dinner on the table was the most important thing in the Hume household. His father had no time for the bitterness and extremes of nationalism and unionism. They lived in a mixed part of Derry. Hume's own great-grandfather had been a Scottish Protestant who'd married an Irish Catholic. As Hume said in his Nobel Peace Prize speech, the answer to difference is to respect it. There wasn't a huge amount of respect on display in the Derry Hume grew up in. It was a city divided by tradition and controlled by the Unionist minority. The Catholic majority endured chronically poor housing and a lack of education and opportunity. Born in 1937, John was just the right age to be one of the first wave of Catholics to get a free secondary education.
I passed 11 plus in its first year, and I got a university scholarship. Without that, I would not have been educated. When we came back from university, I felt I had a duty to help those that weren't as lucky as me.
Hume trained first to be a priest, then a teacher. He became more and more active in helping people to improve their lives, to feed and clothe their families, or put a roof over their heads. In 1960, he was the driving force behind one of the very first credit unions in Ireland. As a young boy, John was very affected by the sight of seeing his mother handing cash over to moneylenders who used to call regularly to their front door. It was actually one of the main reasons he wanted to set up a credit union, to give ordinary people like his mother access to cash and get them out of a poverty trap. Years later, he recalled proudly that this credit union in Derry set up many small businesses and only put one out of business, and that was the pawnbroker. Living in the Catholic Bogside area himself, Hume saw every day how large families were crowded into overflowing tenements and flats. But as housing waiting lists in the city grew, families from one tradition always seemed closer to the top of the list. Hume realised that the simplest way to protest about inequality was to tackle it, so he started building houses. Along with a local priest, he set up Ireland's first non-profit housing association, and some of the first people to benefit are still in those homes today. Isabel, remind me, what was it like years ago when you were trying to get a house?
It was awful, very depressing. We knew that we would never get a house, because I lived at home with my mother, my father. I had 5 sisters and 2 brothers, and we didn't even have a room together, my husband and me. We slept in separate rooms.
We lived in Patrick's house, but we had one of the bedrooms upstairs, you know, so we had 3 kids. We had 2 cots, a kid in each cot, and the oldest boy in the bed with us. And we had a press at the side, which was your food at the bottom and your dishes at the top, you know. So we really lived in this one room. You know, it was horrendous.
I had too many kids to go and rent a flat anywhere, you know, because nobody would give you a flat with 5 children running around. So then my husband came in one day and said John Hume was going to build houses.
Only for John Hume, when they started this, we were able to put our name forward, and we were lucky enough to get a house through him.
Can you remember the day you got your first house? Can you remember coming up here?
Oh, I would absolutely, just never. I still could even remember it now, like, even after all these years. But when we're sort of walking up the street and you looked here and you thought, it was your own house, you were your own boss, you know, you were turning the key and you were going in and, you know, the kids had room.
The tears were in your eyes.
After the success of the first small estate, Hume was eager to build more to help other young families. But that would mean going against his father's wishes, engaging with politics and standing up to an unfair system. The City Council controlled not only housing waiting lists, but also planning permissions for new estates. And although the vast majority of people in the city were Catholic, they were corralled into one voting ward, which held a minority of council votes.
The North Ward has 8 Unionist councillors, the South Ward has 8 Nationalist councillors, and the Waterside Ward 4 Unionist councillors.
Any planning applications for new houses outside of the crowded Catholic South Ward were rejected by a permanent Unionist majority. It seemed the system was not only unfair, it was unchangeable.
I'm a Catholic. I live and work in Derry. My view is that the division in the population which exists here must be eradicated if the city is to have a future. Both sides must work to build the city. But as a Catholic, I must also bluntly state that Catholics here are faced with blatant social injustice in the form of gerrymander, in the form of discrimination.
Tensions were rising in Derry. Hume and others were overwhelmed by the enormous sense of basic unfairness pervading the city. But he was still wary of politics, wary of political protest, wary about how to confront the inequality. By the mid-1960s, John had actually given up teaching and he'd set up a business of his own, a fish processing plant with a good friend of his. He'd always felt really strongly that it was one thing to complain about oppression and a lack of opportunity, but that it was up to Catholics and nationalists to get out there and to do something for themselves. He was trying to set an example, encouraging self-help in his community, taking a positive approach, but he kept getting knocked back. In 1965, he led the campaign for a new university to be situated in Derry to provide jobs and opportunity and a boost for the city. It went instead to Unionist Coleraine. The 28-year-old John Hume needed to face up to his political destiny. What was unavoidable was that John was living in a wholly unfair system, and that system wasn't changing. Perhaps he could look across the Atlantic for some inspiration.
I have a dream.
The civil rights movement in America and the words and actions of Martin Luther King had an enormous influence on Hume. He was deeply inspired by the effectiveness of peaceful protest. King's mantra of non-violence, no retaliation, of just letting the world see what the aggressor was doing, ignited a spark in John Hume. It showed him a way he could be involved in politics, a path based not on taking sides, but on peace, consensus and agreement.
Get on the pavement. You have a right to be on the pavement. Stand on the pavement. Stand on the pavement.
He also recognised early on the power of the media and the public relations value of peaceful protest. As the RUC would try to break up sit-downs, drag protesters off, douse them with water cannon, the protesters would chant, "The whole world is watching, the whole world is watching." And the whole world was watching. Television was turning a civil rights protest in a small province on the edge of Europe into a global story. And one of those watching this unfolding story was about to become really important to John Hume. In 1969, a young senator from Boston, whose entire family were stitched into the fabric of 60s America, was watching news reports of John Hume, standing up against inequality and leading civil rights protests in a tiny province on the edge of Europe. The senator was so moved, he sent a telegram of support. Today, the Irish struggle again, but not alone. Your cause is a just cause. The reforms you seek are basic to all democracies worthy of the name. My hopes and prayers go with you. Senator Edward M. Kennedy. This telegram changed everything. The civil rights problem in Derry and across Northern Ireland was becoming a global issue. And already the pacifist John Hume was gaining heavyweight support for his ideas on a peaceful, democratic solution. But where did those ideas originate? When John left school, he came here to Maynooth to study to be a priest. One of his lecturers, Cardinal Tommaso Fee, remembered him as a brilliant scholar. After a time, though, John decided the priesthood wasn't for him, but not before learning a number of key life lessons, especially an absolute dedication to logic. I really think that Hume used the logic he learned here in Maynooth throughout his entire political life, especially in the way he set out to solve the Irish question. It was a logic that some people said bordered on doggedness or stubbornness. But Hume really believed that he knew not just the problem, but also the solution, and he was unswerving in that belief. His friends called it his stickability. I think it's one of his main claims to greatness.